Good morning to all of you. Dobro ranku. Welcome to all participants, especially those joining us from Ukraine, despite the difficult circumstances. I'm Manuela Prina. I work at the European Training Foundation, and today I'm connecting from Torino in Italy, where the ETF is located. Before starting, and while more colleagues are joining us, we are already 390 people connected. Let me remind you that we have interpretation in Ukrainian. So you can select the interpretation service at the bottom right of the screen. And I also remind you that the meeting is being recorded. So should you don't want to appear on video, please switch off your camera. We will have a meeting where we are all connected. So it's important we keep our microphones off while the session is going. But you are welcome and invited to use the chat. I actually see there are already 63 comments in the chat to share your questions, and we will make sure that we have time to go through the answers as much as possible during the session. And then, of course, we will get back to you later also in writing. We come from many institutions and many countries today. Today is a milestone, and I would like to congratulate all who really worked on this important work of comparison between the Ukrainian qualification framework and the European qualification framework. Ukraine is the first country that has completed the comparison. This is a new process that allows countries that are not yet part of the EQF to come closer and be part of the European Union family. This process has started with Ukraine before the war, but it has continued with even stronger strength, I would say resilience and commitment from both Ukraine and also from members of the European Union. This has signed an important milestone in the work and the vicinity between the European Union and Ukraine, a vicinity that we wish and count will become even stronger as days pass. So before we start the meeting, let me share that we stand with you. We stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. During our meeting, we will share the result of the comparison of the EQF with the Ukrainian qualification framework. We will explain the process behind the comparison, and we will also go into details of why this is important and how we can use the results. To open the meeting, I'm really honored to have with us Mr. Stefan Olsson and Mr. Andrei Vitrenko. Let me introduce them before I give them the floor. Mr. Stefan Olsson is the Deputy Director General of the Directorate for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion since September 2022. Mr. Olsson has been working in the European Commission since '96, and he has been working on social field, anti-discrimination, equal opportunities, and social dialogue. DG Employment is the house of qualifications, I would say, in Europe, where the team that is really the force and strength of the qualification work is hosted. Let me introduce Deputy Minister Andrei Vitrenko and thank him for being with us today. Mr. Vitrenko is a PhD in economics from Taras Shevchenko University, one of the most renewed universities of Ukraine, where he has worked as professor. He is deputy minister since 2020, and I would like to thank him and really acknowledge the resilience, the work, the strength that Mr. Vitrenko with his team has had for all those months. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Olson for his opening address. Mr. Olson, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you, Manuela, for that very nice welcome to us all. Dear Minister, dear all, I'm very happy on behalf of the European Commission to be able to welcome you to this webinar on the comparison report of the European Qualifications Framework and the Ukrainian National Qualifications Framework. This has many aspects and has become an extremely important exercise in many ways, not least as we can now present this report very close to the 1 year of Ukrainian resistance that we acknowledged last Friday against the unjustified Russian war of aggression. So this is one more sign of that we are all in this together, and to mark also, as you said, Manuela, very much our enormous appreciation for what you are doing, Minister, and your people. The report was only made possible thanks to the exceptional cooperation and commitment of everybody who contributed, especially on the side of our Ukrainian friends in these very exceptionally challenging circumstances. It's a result of joint work by the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Qualifications Agency, the European Commission, and of course the European Training Foundation, as well as many more participants from EU member states in Ukraine. The aim of the report is to allow us to better understand how Ukrainian qualifications compare with EU issued qualifications. We started, as you said, Manuela, in October 21. At that time, many Ukrainians were already working in the EU, along with a large number of Ukrainian companies that were providing services, for example, in IT. And then when Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago, we of course were not certain how this work on this report would continue. But it immediately became very clear how important this work was, with around 4 million people fleeing the war to the EU in the first month. And then the immediate need to recognize the qualifications of Ukrainians in Europe, both for entry into the labor market and for educational purposes. The EU acted very quickly on the European Temporary Protection Directive, which was adopted on the 1st of March 22, and that, as we all know, confers rights to Ukrainian nationals fleeing the war, including the right to housing and employment in the EU. During this period, our services stayed in close contact, and we agreed to continue the comparison work. And the result is this report, which is the first of its kind. This in-depth analysis comparison will hopefully be a very useful tool for practitioners, policymakers, educational institutions, and citizens alike, both in Ukraine and beyond. Linking the qualifications systems have never been so important, especially now also that Ukraine has become a candidate country to the EU and joined the European Qualifications Framework Advisory Group. This report will in that context also help to support the process we have ahead. It's a first step in the process to European Qualifications Framework referencing. The work also fits very well with the 2023 European Year of Skills, which President von der Leyen announced in last September. And one of the elements of the year is really the recognition of qualifications of third country nationals. So with those words, I would very much like to thank and congratulate all participants involved in this very important work, and of course, again, in particular, the colleagues from Ukraine for their commitment in concluding this work in spite of all the challenges. So I'm looking very much forward to seeing the presentation, and I am convinced that the report will be in good use. We're standing with you, Ukraine, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. It's now an honor and pleasure for me to invite Deputy Minister Andrei Vitrenko for his opening remarks. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Manuela. Шановний пане Олсоне, дорогі пані та панове.
Dear Mr. Olson, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Minister of Education and Science and his team. We know that today's webinar became possible thanks to the intensive work of our Ukrainian team, as well as the ETF team, and the Ukrainian National Qualifications Agency team, and the Ministry of Education and Science. As you know, the improvement of the national qualifications framework is one of the key commitments within the framework of Bologna process, and today we are happy to present the results of this work. Under conditions of the full-scale Russian invasion and massive movement of Ukrainian citizens, both internally and to other countries, improving awareness about the system of qualifications is of utmost importance, as we are now facing the challenges for which we were not ready. I would like to inform you that as of today, as a result of the terroristic attacks in Ukraine, over 2,700 education institutions have been damaged, and over 440 have been completely destroyed, and ensuring a good knowledge of Ukrainians of the qualification system is the key task for the stakeholders in the area of qualifications. The report we are presenting today is important for the clear presentation of the Ukrainian education system for all the stakeholders, including government institutions and educational institutions, and all the citizens of Ukraine and other countries. We are doing our best to make Ukrainian qualifications to become clearer for everyone. I would like to wish all of you fruitful work and a good discussion, which will become the basis for further integration of Ukraine into the European Union. I also would like to thank all the European citizens and all the governments of the EU countries for their support. Today, we know well who are our real friends and who only seemed to be good friends. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Thank you for your words and thank you for your work. We will continue working very closely with you and your team. Let me just share that we are now 556 connected. I saw messages coming in the chat from all over Europe, but also all over Ukraine. I can really say that the qualification community is here. The qualification community that it's part of the education and training, but also of the employment side. So it's an important meeting for really connecting the education, the transition of citizens to the world of work, and as we said, the vicinity between Ukraine and the European Union. Thank you for being here. I now pass the floor to what I would call the dream team, the team that really made this possible to continue, and I would say also to accelerate the comparison exercise. I can say that really nothing has stopped them, and I would like to thank all of them for the work they have done during the last year. So let me introduce them briefly, and then I will give them the floor for the presentation of the comparison report. From the European Commission, from the DG Employment, team leader Koen Nomden and the policy officer Tina Polo are with us. Good morning, Koen, and good morning, Tina. From Ukraine, Mr. Yuri Rashkevchik, I hope I pronounced well the last name, from the National Qualification Agency, and Katerina Suprun, acting head of the expert group on digital transformation of Ukraine, of education and science from the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. Good morning, Yuri, and good morning, Katerina. Thank you for being with us. And from the European Training Foundation, Arjen Day, who is the coordinator of our qualification team, and Anatoly Garmash, our senior expert on qualification systems. Now, it's over to you, dears, to present the qualification comparison report. So, Koen, I give you the floor. And for the next 30 minutes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manuela. So, dear Deputy Minister, dear Stefan, dear Manuela, dear all, I'm very happy to be able to start the presentation of the report here this morning. Slava Ukraini. I think this is a very important morning for all of us. We will present to you, and I think that the slides are now starting, the way we have been working. So the process of comparison, what does it mean? What are also the objectives of the comparison? And also a bit how this is different from EQF referencing, but also a step towards EQF referencing. We will then go on with presenting the main elements of the content of the report, also the main findings. We'll also look there a bit into how the EQF works, how the Ukrainian education system works, and also what is the added value of the report. We'll also tell a bit about how we actually worked together in order to get the report done. And as already said by Manuela, this was a real teamwork, not just of the team members that Manuela mentioned, but much broader. Also, many stakeholders on the Ukrainian side have been involved. And on the EU side also, we had a couple of member states representatives who were very active in the report preparation. And then we will refer to how the comparison reports can be used with, again, two other speakers. We can now move to the next slide. So when we talk about the process of comparison, the first question, of course, that comes to mind is why to compare qualifications frameworks. So in general, and we can move to the next slide, the reason to do comparison work is really related to people coming to the EU and also returning from the EU to their home countries for study or work purposes. And And we know, as Stefan Olsen already said in his introduction, that EU companies, of course, work also outside the EU. Services are delivered to the EU, for example, by platform workers working from Ukraine. And also before the war, there were many Ukrainians already active for professional reasons in the EU. And the skills and qualifications of people from outside the EU are not always well understood in the EU. And this has the disadvantage that in many cases, these qualifications are not sufficiently valued. So with the consequence that people work, let's say, not at the level of their qualifications, but are accepting very easily to do other work. So their full potential, the potential of their skills is not used. And this is in nobody's interest, also not in the economic interest, for example, of the EU, where there is an increased need for qualified workers. Now, we have been developing some criteria for comparison, and it's actually, and maybe we can move to the next slide. It's actually the case that we agreed within the context of the EQF work that there needs to be policy relevance in order to carry out comparisons. And also there needs to be a qualifications framework that is operational. And for both of these criteria, it was clear that Ukraine, before we started the work, so before 2021 October, when we started, Ukraine was satisfying these criteria. Now, comparison has to be understood as a process that should enable trust in both two things: quality of qualifications, but also the level of qualifications. And all of this is supporting the recognition of qualification. And this helps, of course, for the international mobility of learners and workers in two directions, we have to say. The direction from the third country to the EU, but also, of course, back when you obtain qualifications in the EU and you want to use them outside the EU. And the objective is clearly to enhance the transparency and comparability of qualifications. The objective is not to achieve automatic recognition, but of course, if you have more transparency, if you have a better comparability, this will make recognition easier. Now, the comparison means also that between the EQF and the Ukrainian qualifications framework, we have compared the situations as they stand, as they stand in formal terms, but also, and this is even more important, as things stand in practice. And now that we have looked at the objectives and the reasons also for comparison, we will look into the EQF and into the Ukrainian education system. And for this, I pass the floor to my colleague, Tina Polo.
Thank you, Koen. Yes, like Koen said, I will shortly explain what is EQF so we know and better understand what we have compared here. And shortly speaking, EQF is a meta framework, so framework of frameworks which participating countries reference to. And EU developed the European qualifications framework as a translation tool to make national qualifications easier to understand and to compare. And as the education policy is primarily competence of member states, EQF works only on voluntary basis and is not based on legislation or directive, but a non-binding recommendation. And it really consists on voluntary actions and cooperation of member states. And the first recommendation was given in 2008, and it was revised in 2017. And this recommendation, it really invites countries to reference their national qualification frameworks to European qualification framework in order to establish a transparent relationship between their national qualification levels and the 8 levels of EQF. And the EQF covers really all types and all levels of qualification. And as it uses the learning outcomes, it makes clear what a person knows, understands, and is able to do. And in that way, the framework helps improve the transparency, comparability, and portability of people's qualification, and makes it possible to compare the qualifications from different countries and institutions. And it really aims to support the cross-border mobility of learners and workers. It also promotes the lifelong learning and professional development across Europe. And there are at the moment altogether 39 countries now working towards implementing EQF, and 36 of them has already referenced their national qualification framework to EQF. In addition to the EU member states, there are countries from European Economic Area, including Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. And there are also EU candidate countries like now Ukraine, and also potential candidate countries participating. And all these countries, they form our advisory group of European qualification framework together with different stakeholders. And also in every country, there's a respective national coordination point. And our advisory group is also supported by CEDEFOP and ETF and of course the Council of Europe. Now we can go further from here to the next slide, and I will give floor to Katerina.
Дякую, Тіна. Дякую, колеги. Вітаємо всіх. Вже наші колеги з Європейської комісії.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, dear colleagues. Our colleagues and the deputy minister have already noted that besides the practical and the technical context of this comparison, we have a more global context that we are in. Ukraine has now been at the day 368 of a full-scale invasion. Almost 3,000 educational institutions have been damaged or destroyed. 400 children were killed, and the quantity of internally displaced persons and migrants is about 7 to 8 million. These are the citizens that require educational documents and extra support for employment or continuation of education purposes. So the work we have been doing with the colleagues from the European Commission and the European Training Foundation has gained new scale, because this scale of damage to the educational system of Ukraine is so immense. And that's why we see added value in this report as providing proper interpretation to our qualification system and to our educational qualifications and our framework for our citizens who are now finding themselves in this situation. What are the key advantages of this comparative analysis? We would like to outline a couple of aspects. First and foremost, taking into account the number of Ukrainians displaced inside Ukraine or abroad, we can see that comparison can simplify the process of gaining qualifications or recognition of qualification. And the other speakers have already mentioned that our citizens
їх рівні кваліфікації,
Can-
їх освітньому, академічному,
then obtain their education or qualification development, which is corresponding to their level of qualification or to their professional specialization, and ensure continued learning or employment and gain extra benefits for professional and educational development. Secondly, the availability of such reports will facilitate in the formation of digital and educational modalities for recognition of educational documents. We are cooperating with our colleagues from the European Union in order to ensure the possibility of reflecting the Ukrainian documents on education or being validated by the EU countries. This enables their recognition in order for our educational system to be transparent and understandable to EU countries. And I give the floor to Yuri Ershkevich from the National Qualifications Agency. Dear colleagues, I'm glad to welcome you at this event, which is essential for the Ukrainian qualification system, summarizing the 1.5-year work on a comparison of the national qualification framework with the European qualification framework. And I would like to analyze some side effects of the fact that this work was in parallel with the preparation of the report. So the interest to the national qualification framework has significantly increased among the key stakeholders in Ukraine, and that facilitated and boosted their recognition. And the fact of recognition of the national qualifications framework increases its validity and value. The work started, in fact, at the end of 2020, after the last reading of the national qualifications framework was approved, and the Minister of Education and the National Qualifications Agency has created a working group on comparing the European and Ukrainian qualifications. And this group included all the stakeholders from the educational environment, expert environment, and universities. And this comparison work became nationwide and impacted the development of different components of the educational system and the professional environment. For example, the comparison clearly impacted the standards, the development of standards of secondary education. So we have been reforming the secondary school system, transitioning to a 12-year secondary education, and the world is orienting on the fourth level of qualification of the qualification framework, which we are striving to do as well. And it also impacted the harmonization of standards and a more profound application of the descriptors of the national qualification framework in the educational programs. In the process of this work, the agency has developed a methodology for recognition of the national qualification framework for professional qualification, which is now being used by the developers of professional education standards. And we have enhanced the attention to the trends being in place in the European educational environment. We are now discussing the inclusion of micro-qualifications into the national qualification system, and they're used in the educational system in the lifelong educational system. And in essence, those processes and those broad discussions underway in Ukraine regarding comparison of the national qualifications framework with the European one, they're also impacting the correction of policies of the agency for ensuring the quality of higher education, which controls the quality of education. And this is laying more stress on the quality of the educational process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, and just to add to that added value of comparison, I believe that, you know, in the process of working towards the report, we of course had intensive dialogue and intensive cooperation between the Ukraine and the EU, Commission, ETF, the member states. And this is very important because in order to understand the qualification, it's not just necessary to understand, I mean, the qualification as such, but this whole work of comparison is also an issue of understanding an entire system. And because qualifications, of course, sit within their system, and the dialogue and the cooperation around it also allows to have some policy learning from each other, and this of course helps to further develop systems. And when we think about added value at EU level, we should of course also not forget the existence of the association agreement between the EU and Ukraine of 2014 that entered into force in 2017, and that already referred to work on qualifications and qualifications frameworks. And we hope that through the report, indeed, we will come to a situation where also Ukrainian qualifications are valued at their proper level by employers in the EU, and that also in future situations, when everything hopefully will be normalized at some stage and Ukraine will have all its territory back, but also Ukrainians that have obtained qualifications in the EU can also put these to use in Ukraine. Now, developing a procedure for comparison is based on actually the EQF recommendation that already Tina referred to. And since 2017, there is actually a mandate in place to do international work around the EQF. And this exactly refers to comparison, and more specifically, it invites the European Commission to develop procedures and criteria for comparison of the EQF with qualifications frameworks from other countries and regions in the world. And these procedures and criteria for comparison, of course, have as an aim to enhance transparency, to enhance the understanding, and finally, of course, also to support recognition of qualifications. How have we gone about it? So we had established a group of EQF advisory group members and also some members of the national coordination points that worked and that developed these procedures with also the support of the European Training Foundation very much in this international work. And when I talk about the EQF AG, I talk about member states there in particular, and the comparison work builds also on some previous experience that we already had with Hong Kong, with Australia and New Zealand, but this real, let's say, procedure that we developed, these real criteria were applied for the first time in the comparison project with Ukraine. Now, Tina will now explain to you a bit more about where we stand with our comparison work in general.
Yes, thank you. Yes, like Koen said, after updated recommendation and this new procedure developed here, we started the first pilot, and the first pilot started with Ukraine. and it started like said or earlier in October 2021. And we have already other pilots started, and we started last November pilot with Cabo Verde's national qualification framework. And here we anticipate to have our final report before the end of this year. And also we have now under the preparatory phase third pilot, and it's the pilot with regional qualification framework of the Southern African Development Community. And really, as said before, the comparison plays a role in EU's external relations policies, and it has this political role in association agreements and mobility partnerships in EU, and also these new candidates for these kind of comparison projects are considered, among other things, according to these aspects, the mobility, economic cooperation, and these agreements with EU. And then we can go further, and I give floor to our colleagues in European Training Foundation.
Good morning, Dobar Varanku. So I would explain a little bit how we worked, because it is a different process than referencing, where actually we compare the NQF of a country to the descriptors of the EQF and the criteria of the EQF. Here, it's not about conformity. So the process starts with initiation. That's about the readiness. The NQF has to be operational, as Koen explained. And then, of course, we were also discussing what are we going to discuss in this process, because there are a number of topics that we will cover further on, but they are, let's say, recommended, and we need to see to what extent they are really also relevant for the process. Also, setting up teams that are including all the people that can add to the discussion was also very important. The whole thing was about dialogue, understanding and comparing each other's systems. It's not about conformity, but about comparability. Now, we started with identification, which was, of course, agreeing the topics for comparison. And for instance, what we saw is that there was a topic on which we normally use in many countries about the relationship between the NQF and other overarching frameworks. In this case, we did not cover it because the framework did not have any links with other regional frameworks. Once we had agreed topics, we met, we started to collect the evidence. This is the documentation stage, and identifying also the most appropriate resource persons that are involved. So when we had a discussion on the stakeholders, all stakeholders that were involved in the NQF were involved. When we had a discussion on recognition, we had people involved from the ENG in Ukraine. When we had a discussion on quality assurance, we had people involved from the Higher Education Qualifications Agency. So always trying to get the information right from the source. And the comparison was really about understanding each other's systems, discussing the systems, trying to also ask probing questions, and then comparing to what extent these systems were really comparable. And the results, they are available for each topic, but also for the process as a whole. In the end, we had 15 meetings, and they were interrupted by the war, as also Koen described, in March. And we decided it was important to continue the work because we could support with this also the recognition of the qualifications of Ukrainians that came to the EU. And the results were presented in the EQF advisory group in June, and also a draft report was presented in the autumn, and today it is being shared with everybody. Thank you. Let's all hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you. As Arjen described very well, that dialogue and identifying the partners to facilitate the discussion and address the questions, it needs different kind of stakeholders. And from the European Commission, the main stakeholder here is DG Employment. But besides us, our comparison work links to other policies also, like migration and home affairs, education policy, recognition, and external relation policies, among others. So many colleagues has been involved here. And of course, the advisory group of European qualification framework representing the countries in EQF, they are involved here, and they have been following and discussing this comparison pilot all the way. And we really had also invaluable input from three countries, Latvia, Poland, and Croatia, of the advisory group working more closely on this pilot. And of course, ETF is a key worker here and has been facilitating the comparison process all the way from the European side. And Katerina and Yuri?
Так, я тут хочу додати, що я вже перерахував основних, так би мовити, стейкхолдерів.
I would like to add that I have listed on this slide the main stakeholders. I would add to this list the representatives of the Ministry of Economy, also representatives of the professional community, such as IT communities, also lawyers community manifested some interest to take part in this work on comparing the qualification framework and putting them in practice.
And perhaps now we go further to the main elements of the content and findings. Please go ahead, Arjen.
Sorry, and thank you very much. We're now going to look at the topics that we have been discussing. So the first topics we had, of course, we had 10 topics that we covered, and I will cover the first 5. So the first one is the objectives. And of course, in terms of objectives, these frameworks, they are quite similar because also they were developed, the Ukrainian framework, very much inspired by the EQF. But so they are really linked with employability, with the education reforms, with the use of learning outcomes, with transparency, portability and comparability of qualifications, and also with recognition. So like most NQFs that are part of the EQF, the scope of the Ukrainian NQF aims to be comprehensive. And in Ukraine, the level descriptors, they have been changing over time. In 2010, we had 10 level descriptors when it was legislated for the first time. In 2017, when we had the law on education, we went to 11 level descriptors, but in 2020, the NQF was brought more in line with the EQF. Having 8 descriptors. But those level descriptors, although they are very much inspired by the EQF, they go in more detail. For instance, there's one aspect that talks about communication, that is very present in the Ukrainian level descriptors and not in the EQF. And the learning outcomes have been really a key topic, both on the EU side. Of course, it's only the learning outcomes that can allow us to compare qualifications from such different systems, because in the EU we have very different qualification systems, but also in Ukraine this has been a very important aspect. And the first learning outcome-based qualifications, they date back to the early 2000s. But after the law of education, higher education was adopted, we see that many changes are actually taking place on a systemic level. So higher education standards, they are all based on learning outcomes since 2014. And the law on education in 2017 really promoted competency-based education and also lifelong learning, and also the importance of non-formal and informal learning. And that importance of non-formal and informal learning is also found back in the system for the validation of non-formal and informal learning, which of course in the EU is very important, but is actually part of a separate recommendation. But in the case of Ukraine, it's really linked also with the NQF. Work started with the Ministry of Social Policy, with establishing a number of assessment centers for cooks. And in the meantime, it's the National Qualifications Authority that is also accrediting qualification centers that do this job. And the number of qualification centers that are issuing professional qualifications after validation is growing day by day. So now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Anatoly Karmas, who will explain the other criteria.
Thank you and good morning. The other topics among these 10 topics include the quality assurance of qualifications, recognition of foreign qualifications, governance arrangements, communication, and transparency of the process. So in Ukraine, the procedures for quality assurance of qualifications, they cover both the development of qualifications and the delivery of qualifications. As for the development of qualifications, the role of standards is important. Thus, qualifications are developed based on educational and occupational standards. In higher education, an independent quality assurance agency has been established. It has become an affiliate member of ENQA, European Network of Quality Assurance Agencies in higher education, and now it works towards becoming its full member. Governance of the National Qualification Framework includes key stakeholders. As was already mentioned, the National Qualification Agency has already been established. It is the main body now supporting implementation of the National Qualification Framework in Ukraine. And its board includes both governmental members, representatives from ministries, Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Economy, and it also includes representatives of social partners from employers' organizations and trade unions. Regarding communication of National Qualification Framework, information on the NQF on educational and occupational standards is available online. There is also a database where you can verify the issued diplomas. In higher education, diploma supplements include information on the NQF level, and the issue of diploma supplements in electronic format is planned now. The National Qualifications Register has now been developed, but we may say that it is not fully operational yet. It will include data on all qualifications that are part of the NQF. Now, as Ukraine as a candidate country, we can say that Ukraine aspires to link its national qualification register with the European databases. Thank you. Next slide.
Yeah, so among the conclusions, I mean, we believe after these different topics that we have gone through in detail, and which you, of course, do find in the report. We didn't have time to present the details of the report, but our conclusions as team was that the comparison dialogue, the cooperation that we also carried out with that, and in which also so many stakeholders were involved, we believe that the frameworks can be, are comparable, and also can be linked because they have a similarity of objectives and scope. So objectives of both the EQF and the Ukrainian framework are really transparency of qualifications, understanding of qualifications, compatibility of qualifications, and also both the EQF and the Ukrainian framework are, comprehensive in scope, covering all levels of education training, but also covering the domain of non-formal and informal learning. Both are also based on learning outcomes, which is a key principle, and which of course also links qualifications to skills, because it's a transparency of skills and of knowledge. So altogether, the learning outcomes that makes that qualifications are easily understood. Then also both qualifications framework, because of the transparency that they create, will have a function in making recognition of foreign qualifications easier. On both sides as well, there is a strong emphasis on quality assurance. And we have to say here, not only in the field of higher education, where there is, of course, a strong body of quality assurance developed in the context of the European higher education area, but also in the area of vocational education and training. We also have to say, of course, here that Ukraine has also self-certified to the qualifications framework of the European higher education area, and that self-certification report has been annexed to the comparison reports. Then also, on both sides, there are inclusive governance structures. So we have seen, of course, the list of stakeholders that have been involved from the Ukrainian side in the discussions, but that also play a role internally in the national framework of the Ukraine. And here there is, of course, a difference with the EQF in the sense that the EQF is not a qualifications framework as such, but is a meta framework, a reference framework for national qualifications frameworks. And this explains that it has a little bit a different governance structure, namely in particular through the EQF advisory group, but where also not only member states are represented, but also EU level stakeholder representations from employment, from education and training, and also from civil society. And then the last point, which is also key, is the increasing importance of online information and communication to stakeholders and end users. The Ukrainian framework is developing or has developed, but I mean, this is always work in progress, a register for qualifications at the European level. We are we have developed the Europass framework with also there a tool that allows to connect and interconnect national registers, national databases of qualifications frameworks in order to make information on qualifications and their learning outcomes and their level, etc., available to everyone. And related to this development, I would say, is also the development that we see towards the digitalization of qualifications itself, the way they are issued, because this contributes further to their transparency and also to trust in qualifications. So overall, we can say positive results, hopefully leading to a better understanding, a better transparency. We believe indeed that the report is achieving that. And of course, also in this context, we have to say that, I mean, the comparison is an important first step towards EQF referencing, which is different in character because this implies that the Ukraine qualifications framework will have to demonstrate how it really respects the EQF referencing criteria. And I think we can now pass on again to Yuri to show the table of levels of EQF and Ukrainian qualifications frameworks.
Так, дякую, Кон. Значить, я думаю, що ця таблиця відповідності, вона в першу чергу...
Thank you. I believe that this table will be of most interest to our European partners because it allows to understand better our Ukrainian qualifications system, and this will improve recognition of the Ukrainian qualifications abroad. This table is also important domestically. We are still discussing this system. It has not been defined yet legislatively. So the columns in this table represent 4 components of the education in Ukraine. You see here general secondary education, vocational education and training, pre-higher professional education, and higher education. The professional education and vocational educational and training include very broad sector. We have not performed the analysis and comparison, yet we are moving to the 12-year-long general secondary education, and we are trying to ensure that final qualification will correspond to the 4th level of the national qualification framework.
Кваліфікації професійної освіти, вони відносяться від
So
другого...
the professional qualifications refer to levels 2, 5, and 5 of the national qualifications framework, but in practice, we don't have the 5th level qualifications in the system of professional education and vocational education, actually. We have up to level 4. So the main scope of qualifications, and most students have gained, having gained 5th level qualifications. This is professional bachelor students. So 90% of all students gaining qualifications of the 5th level of the national qualification framework are getting a bachelor's level degree. So this is the main application of this qualification level. It used to be a junior specialist before, now it's bachelor's degree. Students from university level educational institutions usually gain education in a very academic specialization with a very narrow scope, and then they continue their education. And when we're talking about university level qualifications, they are quite traditional. 4 steps that correspond to level 5-8 of the European qualifications framework and correspond to the life learning principle. So those steps are developed by representatives, developers from the professional environment. So trade unions and vocational education institutions contribute to development of those levels so that they are included in the educational system. And also professional qualifications can be assigned by also educational centers based on non-formal and informal learning outcomes. We have approved respective legislation, and a couple of qualificational centers have been assigned and certified to provide those qualifications. This has been intensively developing during 2022 and 2023.
Yeah. Now about some of the next steps. So the report is ready. It exists in Ukrainian and in English, so it's available in both languages. And on the Europass platform, the report is available, and the link was sent to you before in the chat. There is another link to the report itself, where we have a little issue at the page of teach employment, but we will correct that and look into that. The report is also available through the website of the Ukrainian Ministry. So we will now undertake efforts to jointly, of course, disseminate the results of the comparison, and we hope that it will play its role, you know, in supporting the transparency and comparability of qualifications. It will also, of course, be available through the ETF Resource Hub on Ukraine, which I think we also need to mention because it contains excellent information about Ukrainian qualifications already. And this report is, of course, of important added value also to the Resource Hub. On the other hand, of course, Ukraine will assume its responsibility, which it now has as a candidate country. And of course, it will get EU support for it. One of the elements there is also that, as already said before, but this is quite an important element, that Ukraine is now member of the EQF advisory group, and this does so much facilitate the dialogue, because it means that Ukraine is participating in this in this body of work, and the advisory group meets 3 times a year. But that's not the only thing it does. It also carries out pilot, it carries out the comparison pilot project, but also it does project work. For example, now on short descriptions of learning outcomes of qualification. It also is looking at international qualifications, and also peer learning activities take place in which Ukraine can now also participate. So I would really like everybody to read the reports, either in English or in Ukrainian. And also, if you have any comments, to give us feedback, because it's not, of course, a one-off exercise. The report is part of a broader process. A first element of this is for the EU and Ukraine, also with the help of the European Training Foundation, to develop and implement a joint action plan. Also referencing to the EQF is part of the next steps. And so we would very much see this comparison report as also an element, a key element in this process of further intensive dialogue and cooperation between the EU and Ukraine in the field of qualifications. Now, Yuri, I pass the floor to you also to explain a bit how from the Ukrainian side you see the next steps.
Дякую. Як я вже сказав, що сам процес порівняння...
Thank you. I already mentioned that the process of comparison of the EQF and the national qualification framework has activated the process of the national qualification system formation and educational qualifications improvement. And the practical steps we are planning to implement include finalization of legislation development. It's a comprehensive set of legislation in the fields of education and employment, in particular a law on vocational and technical education. This is hard work, but we hope that this law complies with the framework law on education. We have specific laws on secondary education, on vocational education, will finalize the legislative support of the educational system. And we also have a draft law on adult education. It's intensively being worked on, and the law on the national qualification system, summarizing every aspect we have discussed here. And we hope that micro qualifications will be also legislated upon, and they are also being actively processed also by the European countries. And another important step is including the national qualifications in the educational documents, so a certifying document, and we have to develop this same reference for the national qualifications framework to be referenced to in the document on vocational education. And we also continue our work on professional standards in terms of ensuring their compliance with the descriptors of the national qualifications framework. And because we have been working on the draft law on vocational education based on the professional qualification, this will enhance and adapt the system to the national qualifications framework. And as Anatoly mentioned, we must make our qualifications register operational. So it's technically in place, but it's not performing all the functions that it should perform. And it would be an instrument for streamlining our internal qualification system and also displaying our qualifications outwards, so to other countries. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of referencing of our national qualifications framework to the European one. And I think this has been the essence of our work during the last 1.5 years.
Yuri, is still you and Katrina.
Ну, що стосується корисних джерел інформації, то я думаю, що тут недоцільно багато коментувати. Ми бачимо на слайді.
Regarding the useful sources of information, we can see on this slide that the key institutions responsible for the national qualification framework are the Ministry of Education and Science and the National Agency of Qualifications, or the National Qualifications Agency, and the single state educational database retains all the data on qualifications. And as I said, it is expected that we are going to process our qualifications register. So there will be one more important link to receive information on professional and vocational qualifications and their place in the national qualification system. Thank you.
And then we have here the links for the information about European qualification frameworks and also the national qualification frameworks in Europe, and they can be found in the Europass platform. There you can find also the online tool you can use to compare the levels of the qualification in any two countries referenced already in the EQF, and find also the examples of the qualification in these levels. And at the Europass page, you can also find relevant links to sites like ENIC network, Lisbon Recognition Convention of Higher Education, and also the studies and more information about qualification frameworks in CEDEFOP web pages as well. And Anatoly, you could shortly say about the.
And NDTF has also launched a resource hub for people fleeing the war in Ukraine, as Ukrainians looking to continue their education for job, for recognition of their qualifications when they are in EU member states. Our resource hub helps them to find this information by providing links to national or European resources, learning of employment opportunities, by providing links to the information on recognition of qualification in the European Union. It also provides information on Ukraine for EU member states, including on Ukraine's education and qualification system, on where to find information on Ukrainian qualifications and programs, accredited providers, credentials that have been used in Ukraine. So overall, since its launch in March last year, the Resource Hub has been visited by more than 17,000 visitors. And most visits were from Germany and Poland. And I guess these are the biggest hosting countries for Ukrainians. But also there were many visits from Ukraine as well. We are continuously updating and extending the information in the Resource Hub, and we're also addressing requests from the users through our email box. So we invite you to use this hub and to have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for the presentation of the report. We hear that a lot of work has been done, a lot of work is still ahead of us. And before we move to the question and answers, let me ask an important question, and which is, how do we use this information? What is the benefit of the exercise? So to answer this question, we have invited, and I'm glad to introduce Ms. Baiba Ramina from the Academic Information Center in Latvia, the ENG, and member of the Bologna follow-up group and the EQF advisory group. Good morning, Ramina. And let me also introduce Ms. Valentina Krasnochkov, expert from the Ukrainian Center of the Ministry of Education and Science. Good morning, Valentina, and welcome. So for you, the question is, how do we use this information? What is the added value of this exercise? Baiba, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all webinar participants. Since my daily work is related to recognition of qualifications, framework of qualifications, and quality assurance, I will speak from this point of view. First of all, I would stress the significant work which was done by especially Ukrainian colleagues to have this excellent comparison report. And the report is clear message on how the qualification system is built in Ukraine and how it compares to the EQF. And the report provides evidence that the included qualifications are quality assured and the learning outcomes are in line with the EQF learning outcome descriptors. How we can use the report already now? First of all, for fair recognition of qualifications. I will remind 5 key elements in recognition. It's level, learning outcomes, quality, workload, and profile. And only profile usually is not covered by qualification framework. If we are looking at Lisbon Recognition Convention subsidiary text from 2013 on use of qualification framework in recognition of foreign qualifications, it said, if a national qualification framework has been self-certified or referenced, there is, as a general rule, no need for the competent recognition authority to investigate the level of qualifications further. And in the case that qualifications have been referenced self-certified, have been referenced toward the same level in overarching frameworks, they should be seen as broadly compatible. And broad compatibility is done with this report. So it makes easy fair recognition for Ukrainian qualification for all stakeholders, higher education institutions, enigmatic centers, other competent authorities. Also, in the future, a comparison report can be used for automatic recognition of qualifications. Why? Council recommendation on promoting automatic mutual recognition from 2018 highlights that there is a need to ensure that national qualification framework or system are referenced to European qualification framework and European qualification area framework. And so This report is step forward to automatic recognition of Ukrainian qualifications. And I would like to mention that fair recognition and automatic recognition supports mobility, supports a lot both for work and studies. And today, a fair recognition of Ukrainian refugees' qualifications, both for work and studies purposes, it is essential for part of daily work of any NARIC offices and higher education institutions. And this comparison report provides a lot of useful information for recognition purposes. And last but not least, is higher education institutions which would like to cooperate with universities in Ukraine and Ukraine universities with universities in EU. And creating joint programs, it's very important to have this general leveling of qualifications to understand that joint program is the same level. And also this report is great help for choosing right programs for joint programs. And once again, thank you so much for comparison report. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Ms. Baiba. And let me give now the floor to Valentina. Valentina, the floor is yours.
Рада всіх вітати сьогодні. Мене звати Валентина Краснощок, я дуже рада бути
I'm glad to
присутня.
welcome everyone here. My name is Valentina Krasnoshchok. I'm very glad to have contributed to this important report as the representative of the National Training Center of Ukraine, and I'm here to crown this meeting. So how does this comparative analysis impact the life of learners worldwide? As a result of this work, the significant work that Ukraine has completed together with our EU partners in terms of recognition of qualifications is including the Ukrainian education to the global market and increasing the transparency of qualification recognitions. And it's really important, especially now when millions of Ukrainians have left abroad and received temporary shelter with the ability to work and are trying to get a job according to their professional education. And we are communicating with the other centers and universities and have received a lot of positive feedback about these comparative reports, which is a possibility to present the national qualification framework and help define the qualifications which would be understandable for all Europeans and raise the Ukrainian qualifications to a higher level, not just in Europe, but also in the world.
То це дуже важливий крок. І як уже Байба згадувала про автоматичне визнання, це теж дуже
automatic recognition mentioned by Baiba would be also very important in terms of Ukrainian qualifications. As for the vocational education and training, this kind of comparison is very important, especially as regards the vocational training certificates and their recognition abroad. In the countries neighboring with Ukraine, the increase in requests for recognition of qualifications has increased greatly. However, despite the fact that in Ukraine there is the database and the qualifications framework, which is an important component, and it is exactly thanks to this the neighboring countries were able to apply speed up procedure which allowed the Ukrainian refugees to enter the employment market sooner. So I would like to thank greatly for your work and for the important results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Ms. Barbara and to Ms. Valentina Krasnochkov for their contributions. And as time is running and we have really 4 minutes left, I would like to thank all of you who also posted questions on the chat. I take the commitment that answers will be sent in writing with the recording of the meeting and all the links that we have shared today, including the link to the report in English and in Ukrainian languages, but also the link to the ETF resource hub and all the relevant websites that have been mentioned today during the presentation. Now, let me challenge my colleagues. So I'll give 1 minute to the European Commission colleagues, 1 minute to the Ukrainian colleagues, and 1 minute to the ETF colleagues for some last words, including making a reference to some of the questions that have been posed. So, Kun and Tina, the floor is yours for 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you very much, Manuela. Just when I look at the questions on the chat, there are, of course, these questions on recognition of qualifications. So I think higher education is relatively clear because Ukraine is part of the European higher education area. When we talk about vocational education and training, this is a competence of the EU member states. So there is no EU rules on this. Also, the EU law that is in existence on recognition of professional qualifications for regulated professions, this is applicable only for EU member states. However, the Commission issued a recommendation asking the member states to be flexible, to be, non-bureaucratic in treating cases where recognition was demanded. And it's also clear that we need to work on the recognition of vocational qualifications within the EU. And I hope that the European Year of Skills provides a good context for this.
I would only add that really this report, it supports the recognition as it increases the transparency, and it also increases our awareness of Ukrainian qualifications framework and also the similarities and differences to European qualification framework. So this our report will support the recognition done in the member states.
Thank you, Kun. Thank you, Tina. And over to Yuri and Katerina.
Ну, більшість запитань стосувалися, без сумніву, питання визнання кваліфікацій.
Clearly, most of the questions were related to the recognition of qualifications, and it was already answered by Tina and Kun. I would like to comment on the question that about the Doctor of Sciences missing. The thing is, the Doctor of Sciences is not considered a level of formal education. It is a purely scientific degree, and that's why it is not reflected in the framework. And the similar situation is in Poland. As we all understand, Lisbon Higher Education Qualification Recognition Convention is the underlying convention regarding recognition of the Ukrainian qualifications. We also would like you to visit the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine and National Qualifications Agency websites. We are all important information about the national framework of qualification and national education system is presented.
We are going to publish, of course, this recording. It will be available in Ukrainian and in English for anybody who wants to look again to this. Also, if you have any questions, please let them come. Also through the resource hub, there is also a possibility to ask questions, and we will continue to answer them. I think the next step will be, of course, working on the referencing and also on the work that we're doing on the register together with the NAC. Maybe Anatoly, if you would like to say a few words, and we finish from here.
I would like only to say that invite participants to read this report in Ukrainian language as well. We have translated the report into Ukrainian. Now it's been published at the European Commission website. We will also publish it at our resources at the Ukrainian Resource Hub. So this report is just the beginning of our work. We will continue. So let's stay tuned.
And with those words, let me thank all of you who have joined today's webinar. Thank also to the interpreters for the work they have done, and all the technical team that is behind the scenes. Thank you for this teamwork that has made the comparison possible, and surely this will facilitate a smooth pathway towards recognition and referencing, and this is the work ahead, as we heard today. Welcome to Ukraine, to the EQF advisory group, and we look forward to continue the work together there. And I would like to thank again the Deputy Minister Vitrenko for the work of the ministry and for being here with us today, and all the team from Ukraine and the many stakeholders that really worked together with the European Commission and the ETF to continue the work together. Let me finish by saying something that I think it's in all our hearts, and it's a hope. In Torino is snowing today, and white is the color of peace and of hope, and we very much wish so for Ukraine and for all citizens. Slava Ukraini, and thank you for being with us today.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuela.